At 20 and still pure, she was given to a cold millionaire. But what happened on the first night changed everything between them. Where are you watching this story from? Subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what she discovered that night will surprise you completely. Meredith's hands trembled as she adjusted the lace veil over her bare shoulders. Grayson's footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, approaching inexorably toward the bridal suite. The scent of magnolia blossoms from the Charleston garden below mingled with her own nervous perfume, and she couldn't decide whether to look at him or keep her eyes fixed on the historic district's lights through the French windows. At 20 years old, raised under the strict values of a traditional Southern family from Charleston, South Carolina, she never could have imagined that her purity and innocence would be traded like currency to save the plantation estate her father had squandered through disastrous investments in cotton futures. Meredith possessed three defining characteristics: a nearly childlike naivete that made her believe in happy endings even in the worst circumstances, a heightened sensitivity that allowed her to perceive every emotional nuance around her, and a quiet strength inherited from the Southern women of her lineage. That ability to weather storms while maintaining posture as straight as the centuries-old magnolia trees on the family grounds. Her internal conflict tore at her daily: accept the role of purchased, submissive wife as her traditional upbringing demanded, or find some way to be seen as a person, not an object. Grayson was known in Manhattan's corporate world as the Ice Emperor. He'd built a billion-dollar empire by 35 through calculated decisions and absolute coldness in the real estate negotiations that transformed New York into an even more vertical, modern metropolis. He'd never married, never shown interest in lasting relationships, and maintained a studied distance from any genuine emotional connection. His motivation for accepting this arranged marriage was purely strategic. Union with a traditional Southern family would open doors in the conservative circles of the South that still resisted his modern, aggressive business methods. When he finally stood before her that first night, his eyes had that metallic glint she'd seen at the altar of St. Michael's Church hours before. But then something unexpected happened. He simply extended a silk shawl and covered her shoulders, with a gentleness that contrasted completely with his reputation. "You're trembling," he said, his deep voice breaking the tense silence. "Not from cold," she replied, surprising herself with her own courage. He seemed genuinely disconcerted for a moment, and she perceived something extraordinary. Behind that mask of absolute control, there was a man who also didn't know exactly what to do. The first twist came when he stepped back and said she could rest easy, that he would take the guest room. For the next 3 months they lived as polite strangers under the same luxurious roof. He left before dawn and returned after she'd already retired. The penthouse in Tribeca, with its 4,000 square feet and panoramic views of the Manhattan skyline, seemed larger and emptier each day. But Meredith began to notice small details. Books by Whitman and Dickinson appeared discreetly on her nightstand, exactly the poets she'd mentioned loving in a casual conversation during a tense dinner. When she commented on missing the flowers of the Carolina Lowcountry, the terrace bloomed with gardenias and azaleas. These were almost imperceptible gestures, but she, with her characteristic Southern sensitivity, caught each one as if they were whispers of something greater. The first major obstacle emerged when his family openly rejected her. Grayson's mother, Victoria, an imposing matriarch who commanded the female wing of the Manhattan business empire, made it clear at a formal dinner, served with champagne and cutting glances, that Meredith was inadequate, too simple, too from the South, to bear the surname they'd carried with pride for 3 generations in the heart of Wall Street. The young wife endured each sharp word, maintaining her straight spine and delicate smile, but when she got home she allowed herself to cry for the first time since the wedding, hidden in the closet so no one would hear. Grayson found her there. For the first time in 4 months of marriage he truly saw her, red eyes, tear-stained face, exposed vulnerability. "My mother is cruel," he said, sitting on the floor beside her without caring about his designer suit. "But you don't need her approval, or mine." The second major twist came when she responded, "But I want it. I want you to see me as something more than a business transaction." The silence that followed lasted an eternity. Then Grayson told something he'd never revealed to anyone. At 10 years old, During the financial crisis that shook America, he'd witnessed his own father's emotional collapse after a devastating business failure. The man who'd always been his reference of strength, a businessman respected on Wall Street, transformed into someone unrecognizable, consumed by shame and despair. Since then, he'd built impenetrable emotional walls, determined never to let feelings weaken him. Absolute control was his only religion. "But look where it's brought me," he whispered, "to a loveless marriage, living like a ghost in my own home." From that moment on, over the following 5 months, something began to change subtly. They started having coffee together in the morning on the terrace overlooking the city. Meredith discovered that Grayson had a dry, intelligent sense of humor when he lowered his guard. He discovered that she had surprisingly insightful opinions about business, the result of years watching her father make the same mistakes repeatedly on the family plantations. The first small twist happened when she suggested a strategy for a problem that had tormented him for months. Instead of forcing a hostile acquisition of properties in the South, why not create a partnership beneficial to both parties? He implemented the idea, and it worked perfectly. Suddenly, Meredith was no longer just the decorative wife, but someone whose mind he respected. The second small twist came when he cancelled a crucial trip to Washington, D.C. to stay by her side, when he learned her father had suffered a nervous breakdown. He held her hand at New York Presbyterian Hospital during the long waiting hours, and she realized his walls were developing cracks. But then came the second major obstacle. An ex-lover of his appeared, Colette, a sophisticated Manhattanite from old money, who personified everything Meredith wasn't: worldly, confident, perfectly inserted in the circles of New York high society. The woman made it clear during a casual encounter on Fifth Avenue that the marriage was temporary, that she would wait patiently until he tired of the Southern belle and returned to the arms of someone who truly understood him. The third small twist emerged when Meredith, instead of confronting him with jealousy, simply asked if he was happy with the life he'd built for himself. "Happiness was never the goal," he responded automatically. "Then what is?" she insisted. He couldn't answer. Over the next 2 months, tension grew in unexpected ways. Grayson began working less, coming home earlier. He found excuses to be in the same room as her. He asked for her opinion on important decisions, but there was an invisible line neither dared cross, a tacit respect for the original agreement. This was an arrangement, not a romance. The first medium twist emerged when Meredith announced her intention to start working. She wanted to use her architecture degree from the College of Charleston, which had remained stored in a drawer since graduation. Grayson could easily have prevented her, but instead he offered her an office in his company and complete autonomy to develop urban renewal projects in historic Southern neighborhoods, something that genuinely interested her, especially the preservation of traditional antebellum homes. During 6 months of working together, they developed admirable professional chemistry. Meredith discovered that Grayson was brilliant and visionary when not hidden behind emotional armor. He discovered that she had creativity and sensitivity for design that transformed cold spaces into welcoming homes, combining Manhattan modernity with Southern tradition. But it was the growing emotional connection that truly frightened them. The second medium twist happened on a night of Manhattan thunderstorms. They were working late on a crucial proposal when the power failed. In the darkness, lit only by lightning over the city, Grayson confessed he was afraid that if he allowed himself to feel something real for her, he'd lose the control that kept him functioning. Afraid that she'd leave him if she discovered how deeply flawed he was inside. Meredith responded with her own confession. She was afraid of falling in love with someone who saw her as an obligation, not a choice. "But I don't see you that way," he said, his voice hoarse. "Not for a long time." That's when he finally kissed her, and it was as if 18 months of accumulated tension exploded in a moment of pure emotional truth. The third medium twist brought complications. His family intensified pressure for him to produce an heir, not from affection, but from business strategy. Victoria went so far as to suggest openly during a party at the Union Club that if Meredith couldn't fulfill this role, perhaps it was time to reconsider the union. The fourth medium twist emerged when she discovered, searching through old documents in his office, that Grayson had a daughter from a previous relationship, a child he supported generously but never visited. The girl, Eloise, lived in a boarding school in Boston. When she confronted him, he revealed the child was born from a casual relationship years ago, and he distanced himself precisely from fear of failing as a father, as his own father had failed him during the crisis. That revelation changed everything. Meredith saw in him no longer the cold, calculating man, but someone as frightened as she was, just better at hiding it. Over the next 3 months, she gradually convinced him to establish contact with Eloise. She accompanied him on the first tense visits to Massachusetts, offered silent support when he didn't know how to act, taught him to be vulnerable with his own child during walks through Boston Common. The third major obstacle came from an unexpected source. Her own father, recovered and ashamed, offered her a way out. He'd managed to rebuild part of his fortune with the sale of plantation land in Georgia, and could return the money that had motivated the marriage. Meredith would be free. For the first time in 2 years, she had a real choice. The third major twist happened when she realized she no longer wanted to leave. Somewhere during that journey between New York and Charleston, between Manhattan coldness and southern warmth, the cold man she'd been forced to marry had transformed into someone she would freely choose. But would he choose her too, if he wasn't obligated? She decided to test it. She announced during dinner on the terrace overlooking the Manhattan skyline that she would accept her father's offer, that she wanted the freedom to start over in Charleston. Grayson's reaction was devastating in its honesty. He begged her to stay. Not from duty, not from contract, but because he couldn't imagine his life without her. "You taught me to feel again," he confessed, tears streaming for the first time. "You taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness, it's courage. You taught me to be a father. You taught me to be human." Meredith stayed, but with one condition: they would start over from scratch. Not as an arranged couple fulfilling roles, but as two people choosing to build something real together. He agreed, and for the first time, they opened their hearts completely to each other, not as husband and wife forced by duty, but as two souls who finally found each other under the starlit sky of Manhattan. The final 6 months of this transformation brought profound changes for both. Grayson learned to balance professional success with emotional presence, even participating in Charleston's traditional festivals when visiting her family. Meredith developed her own respected career, not as someone's wife, but as a talented architect in her own right, specializing in antebellum mansion restoration. Eloise began visiting regularly, dividing time between New York and Boston, and Meredith discovered she had a natural gift for motherhood. The final twist came when she finally became pregnant, but not before Grayson made it clear that, regardless, she would always be enough. The child wasn't a family obligation, but a celebration of the love they'd built against all odds, a bridge between Southern tradition and Manhattan modernity. That first night, when Meredith trembled with fear with the shawl over her shoulders in the Manhattan penthouse, she could never have imagined that Grayson, the cold, distant man from New York, would become her greatest confidant, her true partner, the love she chose even when freedom was offered. And he could never have predicted that the naive, frightened young woman from Charleston would be the one to teach him the greatest lesson of all. That true strength doesn't come from impenetrable walls, but from the courage to open your heart and let someone in, just as the doors of antebellum homes open to let in light and the scent of magnolias. There are moments in life when we stop being who we were to become who we never imagined we'd be. This night would mark the first of those moments. The 3 months that followed unfolded with the choreographed precision of a ballet without music. Grayson left before dawn, when the pink light barely touched the Empire State Building visible from the Tribeca penthouse windows. Meredith woke to the phantom sound of the front door closing, always finding fresh coffee in the kitchen and a handwritten note on the marble counter. "Back late. Don't wait up for dinner." The penthouse had 4,000 square feet distributed on a single floor, expansive terraces with suspended gardens, a library housing first editions of Hemingway and Fitzgerald. It was impressive, imposing, perfect, and absolutely empty. Meredith explored every corner like an archaeologist studying ancient ruins, searching for clues about the man who was her husband only on paper. In his private office, she found degrees in economics and architecture from Columbia and Wharton. Photographs of architectural works, Art Deco buildings he'd restored or constructed, covered an entire wall. There were business books, of course, but also collections of Whitman, Dickinson, even Walt Whitman. Men who surround themselves with poetry but live like machines are fighting an internal war they don't know how to win. One rainy Manhattan afternoon, while reading in the living room, she noticed something strange. A book of Whitman poems that hadn't been there the night before rested on the coffee table, open to Song of Myself. The pages had subtle marks, as if someone had reread those verses countless times. The next day, another book appeared on her nightstand. Emily Dickinson's complete poems, her favorite poet, whom she'd mentioned casually during a tense dinner with lawyers and notaries on the day of signing the marriage contract. It couldn't be coincidence. 2 weeks later, when she mentioned during breakfast, one of the few moments they coincided, that she missed the flowers of the Carolina Low Country, he simply nodded without looking up from the financial newspaper. But the next morning, the entire terrace had been transformed. Magnolias, gardenias, azaleas, camellias, every flower that grew in the Charleston gardens of her childhood now bloomed in the heart of Manhattan. "How did you know exactly which ones?" she asked when she saw him that evening, unable to contain her emotion. "Research," he responded simply, but there was an almost imperceptible blush on his cheeks that Meredith noticed with her characteristic sensitivity. "I thought they might make you feel less alone." It was the first crack in the armor, but not everything was silent gestures and distant consideration. The reality of their situation became painfully clear when they received the first formal invitation from his family, a dinner at the Union Club, where Manhattan's elite gathered to evaluate, judge, and determine who belonged to their golden circle. Meredith carefully chose her dress, black, elegant, but not ostentatious, with an embroidered shawl her grandmother had given her as a wedding gift. Grayson evaluated her with those inscrutable grey eyes when she came down the stairs. "You look beautiful," he said, as if the words physically cost him to pronounce. "But not appropriate," she responded with more bitterness than intended. "Perfectly appropriate," he corrected, offering his arm. "My family is what's inappropriate." He was right. The Union Club emanated decades of privilege and tradition. Crystal chandeliers refracted golden light over impeccable linen tablecloths. The murmur of conversations in clipped East Coast accents, deliberately exclusionary, filled the air like the buzz of aristocratic bees. Victoria, Grayson's mother, presided over the main table like a queen at her court. She had perfectly platinum blonde hair pulled into a French twist, wore a pearl necklace that probably cost more than Meredith's family home in Charleston, and possessed the ability to make a smile seem like a sharpened knife. "So you're the Southern girl who caught my son," she said without rising to greet her. "How quaint." The words fell like ice on the table. The other guests, cousins, business partners, family friends, watched with that cruel curiosity of those who enjoy the spectacle of others' humiliation. "Mother," Grayson warned, his voice acquiring a dangerous tone. "What, son?" Victoria widened her eyes artificially. "I'm just getting to know my daughter-in-law. Tell me, dear, what did you study? Did you finish college or did marriage interrupt your plans? There's poison served in fine crystal glasses, and there's cruelty disguised as polite conversation. The second is more lethal because society applauds it." Meredith felt blood rush to her cheeks. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, hide, disappear. But then she remembered her grandmother, a woman who'd survived the civil rights era with dignity intact, who'd taught her that true nobility doesn't come from titles but from character. "Architecture, ma'am," she responded with clear, firm voice. "I graduated summa cum laude from the College of Charleston. My thesis on the preservation of antebellum homes in the historic district was published in the Journal of the American Institute of Architects." The silence that followed was delicious. Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting intellectual resistance. "Architecture," she repeated, as if tasting sour wine. "How ambitious for a girl from the South." "Charleston isn't exactly a backwater, Mother," Grayson intervened, his hand finding Meredith's under the table. It's one of the most historically significant cities in America, and my wife is more than capable of holding a conversation about architectural restoration. In fact, she probably knows more than most at this table. It was a small moment, almost insignificant to external observers. But for Meredith it meant everything. He had defended her, not with grandiloquence, not by making a scene, but with the simple, forceful affirmation of her worth. The rest of the dinner passed in glacial tension. Grayson's cousins, Colette and Vivian, evaluated her with veiled looks, murmuring to each other between bites of lobster bisque. The business partners ignored her presence completely, addressing exclusively Grayson as if she were decorative furniture. But the worst came at the end, when Victoria stopped her in the cloakroom while Grayson spoke with the club manager. "Listen to me carefully, girl," she hissed, all pretense of courtesy evaporating. "I don't know what arrangement your family made to trap my son, but this is temporary. Grayson will eventually tire of your provincial charm. And when that happens, make sure you leave without scandal. Our family doesn't tolerate melodrama." Meredith looked her directly in the eyes, remembering her grandmother's words. "Dignity is the only thing no one can take from you unless you allow it. With due respect, Mom, your son is an adult man capable of making his own decisions, and I'm not a temporary arrangement. I'm his wife." She left with her head held high, but as soon as they reached the car, the tears she'd contained for hours poured out uncontrollably. She hid in the back seat of the Mercedes, sobbing with a mixture of humiliation, rage, and helplessness. Grayson didn't start the car. He simply turned and watched her cry, his expression transforming into something she'd never seen before: genuine pain. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I shouldn't have brought you here. I knew my mother would plan something." "Why?" she exploded. "Why does it matter so much to them? Why can't they just leave us alone?" "Because control is everything to my family," he responded bitterly. "Controlling money, controlling image, controlling the future. And children are control currency, they always have been. I won't bring a child into this world just to satisfy corporate expectations," Meredith said firmly. "If we ever have children, it will be because we want them, because we're ready, because it will be an expression of genuine love, not because your mother demands it." "I know," he assured, taking her hands, "and I completely agree. My mother can wait until the end of time if necessary." "But that won't stop the pressure," she observed. "It won't stop the insinuations, the comments, the comparisons with women like Colette who apparently would be more compliant." Grayson turned her to look at him directly. "Listen to me carefully, Meredith. I don't want Colette. I don't want anyone from that superficial world where people are interchangeable assets. I want you, your intelligence, your integrity, your way of challenging me to be better. If that means fighting with my family for the rest of my life, so be it." It was the closest declaration to "I love you" he'd verbalized, and though he didn't use those specific words, Meredith heard them clearly in everything else he said. "Then let's fight together," she responded. "But I need to know we're truly together, that this isn't still a convenient contract you're maintaining through inertia." "Convenient contract?" he repeated incredulously. "Meredith, I don't know how to prove what I feel to you. I wasn't educated to express these things. But when you're not here, the penthouse feels empty. When we work together, every project is better because you bring perspective I'd never have. When I see Eloise interact with you, I see the kind of family I never thought I could have. I don't know if that's love by technical definition, but I know I don't want to live without you." It was enough. For now, it was enough. Meredith kissed him, pouring into that kiss everything she also didn't know how to express with words. When they separated, both were breathing irregularly. "We should go back," he said. "I have something to say to my family." They returned together to the dining room, where dinner continued in uncomfortable murmurs. Grayson didn't sit. He simply stood beside Meredith and spoke with authority that permitted no interruptions. "Mother, family, friends, I want to make something absolutely clear. My marriage to Meredith is not subject to external approval. What we decide about our future, including if and when we have children, is exclusively ours. If that's unacceptable to anyone at this table, I'm genuinely sorry." But I won't sacrifice my marriage to please corporate or social expectations. Meredith is my priority. Period. Victoria went pale with fury, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Grayson's father, Sterling, who rarely spoke at family gatherings since the crisis that had broken him years ago, stood up. "Well said, son," he said quietly. "I wish I'd had your courage when I was your age. I wish I'd put your mother before the empire. Maybe then," he looked meaningfully at Victoria, "our family would be less financially successful, but more emotionally happy." It was the first time Sterling had publicly challenged his wife in decades. The shock on Victoria's face would have been comical if it weren't so sad. Grayson and Meredith left shortly after, leaving the family to process the cracks finally appearing in the perfect facade. In the car back, Grayson drove with one hand, holding Meredith's with the other. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For choosing me, for defending what's ours, for finally setting boundaries." "I should have done it long ago," he admitted. "But I was afraid of completely breaking with my family, of being alone. But then I realized I'm never alone. I have you." It was another step in their mutual transformation. But the journey was far from over. Something changed after that night. Subtle, almost imperceptible, like the way dawn gradually transforms darkness. Without you being able to pinpoint the exact moment, night becomes day. Grayson began coming home earlier. Not dramatically, he still worked late. But now they had dinner together at least 3 times a week. Conversations that initially revolved around safe topics, the weather, national news, innocent Manhattan gossip. But slowly, inevitably, the conversations deepened. One night, while sharing shrimp and grits that Meredith had learned to make from a hired chef, he asked about her childhood. "It must have been difficult," he commented, "growing up with a father who, forgive my frankness, who made questionable financial decisions." She could have been offended. She could have defended her father with the blind loyalty family sometimes demands, but she was tired of pretense. "It was painful to see how pride destroys a man from the inside," she admitted. "My father wasn't bad, just stubborn, convinced he knew better than everyone. Every failed investment was someone else's fault. The market, the partners, the economy. Never his judgment." "My father was similar," Grayson confessed, surprising her. Though in his case it was shame that destroyed him. During the 2008 crisis, his company collapsed. We lost everything. I was 10, and I watched him transform from an invincible giant into someone who crumbled a little more each day. His grey eyes clouded with a clearly painful memory. Meredith felt the impulse to take his hand, but restrained herself. There were still invisible lines neither dared to cross. "How did you survive?" she asked gently. "My mother," he responded with a bitter laugh. "Victoria may be many things, but she's a survivor. She negotiated, maneuvered, used every family contact to rebuild from scratch. In 5 years, we'd recovered our social position. But something broke in all of us during that process. We learned that feelings are dangerous luxuries. That control is everything. Children who learn too early that the world is cruel grow up building fortresses around their hearts, forgetting that fortresses are also prisons. And that's why you never allow anyone to really get close?" Meredith asked, knowing she was pushing boundaries but unable to stop. He looked at her for a long time, evaluating. "You're getting close," he finally said. So quietly it was almost a whisper. The moment broke when his phone rang. Work, of course, always work. He apologized and disappeared into his office, leaving her alone with the discovery that the cold, calculating man she'd married wasn't cold at all. He was simply terrified. The following weeks brought more revelations. Meredith discovered that Grayson anonymously donated millions to New York orphanages, that he read poetry before bed, that he'd secretly learned Southern cooking for a year because he wanted to better understand Southern culture, her culture. He discovered that Meredith had a dry, intelligent humor when she felt safe, that she sketched architectural designs for pure fun, that she sang folk songs when she thought no one was listening, her clear, beautiful voice filling the empty penthouse with warmth. One Sunday morning, Grayson found her on the terrace he'd transformed for her, barefoot among the magnolias, wearing a white cotton dress that billowed in the Manhattan breeze. She wore no makeup. Her dark hair fell loose over her shoulders, and she was quietly singing a traditional Southern song. He froze in the glass doorway, simply watching her, and in that moment something changed irrevocably in his chest. A sensation he'd never experienced, that he didn't know how to name, that terrified him as much as it fascinated him. She turned, noticing his presence, and smiled with that innocence he'd begun to value above all worldly sophistications. "Good morning," she said. "Shall we have breakfast together?" "Yes," he responded, his voice hoarse. "I'd like that." And so, without dramatic announcements or grandiose declarations, they began sharing breakfasts on the terrace overlooking the city. Coffee, bagels with cream cheese, fresh fruit. Conversations that flowed naturally. Laughter that emerged unexpectedly. Grayson had, she discovered, a dry, intelligent sense of humor when he lowered his guard. He could be sarcastic without being hurtful, observant without being cruel. He told her stories of absurd negotiations, eccentric clients, the Byzantine politics of Manhattan's corporate world. Meredith spoke about Charleston, about the legends of the Revolutionary War, about the beauty of the Battery at sunset, about traditions maintained alive generation after generation. "Someday I'd like you to take me," he said one morning, "to really know where you come from." "Are you serious?" "Completely," he assured, and she could see he meant it. But life rarely allows happiness without complications. The first true fissure in their progress arrived wrapped in corporate paper and delivered by private courier. A proposal from Colette Ashford, executive president of an investment firm that competed directly with Grayson's interests. But it wasn't an ordinary business proposal. Meredith intercepted the envelope when staff left it in Grayson's office. She had no intention of reading his private correspondence. There were boundaries she respected. But the envelope opened accidentally when she moved it to clean spilled coffee. The words she saw froze her. "Grayson, darling, I know this marriage was strategic, not emotional. When you tire of the Southern Belle and you're ready to resume what we had, I'll be waiting. There's no rush. Good wines improve with time, and ours was always exceptional. With eternal affection, C." Meredith's hands trembled holding the letter. It wasn't the content itself. She knew Grayson had a life before her, but the arrogant presumption, the absolute confidence that this was temporary, that she was temporary. There are words that cut deeper than knives because they confirm the secret fears we keep in the darkness of our hearts. When Grayson arrived that evening, she was on the terrace, the letter resting innocuously on the iron table beside a cup of cold tea. "This came for you," she said simply when he came out to find her. It opened accidentally. He read the letter, his jaw progressively tensing. Then, without ceremony, he tore it into small pieces and let them fall into the nearest magnolia pot. "Colette is," he paused, carefully choosing words, "part of a past that no longer interests me." "By strategy or conviction?" Meredith asked, surprising herself with her own courage. "What?" "Everything in your life seems to be strategic, Grayson. This marriage was strategic. Your previous relationships probably were too. So is your lack of interest in Colette because she no longer fits your strategy, or because you genuinely prefer this?" She gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with everything they hadn't said during months of polite cohabitation. "You want to know the truth?" he finally asked, moving closer until he was inches from her. "The terrifying truth I've been avoiding for weeks." She nodded, unable to speak. "I don't know what this is," he admitted, his voice rough with contained emotion. "I don't know how to label what I feel when we have breakfast together, when I hear you sing on the terrace, when you come home and the penthouse finally feels like a home. I wasn't raised to feel these things, Meredith. I was trained to evaluate them, calculate them, control them. But with you, I lose control, and that terrifies me." It was the most honest confession he'd ever given her. Meredith could see the vulnerability in his grey eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. "Then maybe," she said softly, "you should stop trying to control it. Maybe you should just feel." "I don't know how." "Then learn," she challenged. "Because I'm not going to keep living in limbo." wondering if I'm a real wife or a temporary tenant in your life." It was her own line in the sand. Grayson didn't respond with words. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He took her face in his hands and kissed her. It wasn't calculated or strategic. It was clumsy, desperate, honest. It was the kiss of a man finally dropping the defenses he'd built over decades. When they separated, both were gasping. "You're real," he whispered against her lips. "Too real." And that's what terrifies me. The kiss changed the dynamic between them irrevocably. They could no longer pretend to be merely polite housemates. The attraction they'd been denying for months now hung in the air between them, tangible as the scent of magnolias. But Meredith knew physical attraction wasn't enough. She'd seen enough marriages in Charleston, including her own parents, crumble because they were based on passion without foundation, on desire without mutual respect. "If we're going to make this real," she said one morning over breakfast, carefully choosing her words, "I need more than romantic gestures. I need to be seen. I need to be heard. I need to matter." "You matter," he insisted immediately. "As what?" she pressed. "As a decorative wife? As the Southern girl you brought to impress conservative clients? As—" he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, but making an effort to participate. "As someone whose opinion I value. As someone who makes this place feel like home. As someone who challenges me to be better than I think I can be." It was a start, but Meredith wanted more. "I studied architecture, Grayson, summa cum laude. I have ideas, skills, knowledge being wasted while I play housewife in this penthouse. What do you propose? I want to work. I want to use my degree. I want to contribute, not just exist decoratively." He could have objected. Many men in his position would have, especially coming from traditional Manhattan circles, where wives of successful men dedicated themselves to charity work and social luncheons, not professional careers, but Grayson surprised even himself. "I have a project that might interest you," he said slowly. "We're acquiring properties in Manhattan's historic districts and several southern cities. We need someone who understands how to restore historic buildings without destroying their essence. Someone who respects tradition while incorporating modernity. Someone who, well, someone like you. Are you offering me work out of pity?" "I'm offering you work because you're the most qualified person I know for this," he corrected. "Your thesis on antebellum homes was brilliant. I read it cover to cover the week after our wedding. You have a unique vision that combines preservation with modern functionality. It would be stupid not to take advantage of that." That's how Meredith officially began working. Not in some isolated department where she could be ignored, but directly with Grayson, developing restoration projects that respected American architectural history while making it viable for the 21st century. The next 2 months were revealing. In conference rooms and site visits, Meredith discovered a new facet of her husband. He was visionary, passionate about architecture in ways he rarely showed in social contexts. When they discussed restoring an 18th-century federal-style mansion in Savannah, his eyes lit up in ways she'd never seen. "Look at these columns," he'd point, his voice vibrating with enthusiasm. "They're Greek revival from the antebellum period. If we renovate without respect, we lose 2 centuries of history. But if we preserve them correctly, we can create something that honors the past while serving the present." She found herself complementing his ideas with technical knowledge about traditional materials, old construction methods, heritage conservation regulations. They worked late, surrounded by blueprints and models, passionately debating every detail. "You're brilliant," he said one night, looking at her over a design she'd sketched. "Not just intelligent, brilliant, with real vision." The compliment, coming from someone so sparing with praise, moved her deeply. But with professional closeness came also new personal intimacy. They began traveling together to inspect properties. Savannah, Charleston, back to Boston. Each trip revealed new layers of who they were individually and who they could be together. In Savannah, while visiting Forsyth Park on a golden afternoon, Grayson took her hand without thinking. They walked through the historic district, he pointing out architectural details, while she told him the legends of the antebellum South associated with each square. My grandmother used to say that Savannah's gardens were designed to look like paradise on earth, Meredith said. Moss-draped oaks, azaleas, the sound of fountains, everything a weary soul needs to find peace. Do you believe in paradise? He asked. I believe in moments that feel like paradise, she responded, turning to look at him. Like this one. It was in Savannah that Grayson finally kissed her again, this time without desperation or fear, but with a tenderness she didn't know he possessed. Under centuries-old live oaks, draped with Spanish moss, with the sound of water murmuring in historic fountains, something between them solidified. They were no longer strangers fulfilling a contract. They were two people choosing, day by day, to build something real together. But life, as always, had other tests waiting. The mail arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. Meredith was in the penthouse office, working on proposals for a set of brownstones in Brooklyn Heights that needed urgent restoration, when Grayson's assistant delivered a certified envelope addressed to him. She wouldn't have thought twice about it if not for the sender. Boston Academy, Massachusetts. Something in her southern intuition, that sensitivity inherited from generations of women who read invisible signs, told her that envelope contained important secrets. She didn't open it, of course, but she held it, feeling its weight, wondering. When Grayson arrived that afternoon, he found the envelope intact on his desk. Meredith watched from the doorway as he opened it, read the contents, and his expression transformed into something that could only be described as materialized guilt. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't respond immediately. He simply let the letter fall onto the polished mahogany desk and collapsed into his chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration she'd learned to recognize. "I have a daughter," he finally said, his voice barely audible. The words fell into the room like stones in still water, creating ripples that altered everything. "What?" Meredith approached, incredulous. "Her name is Eloise. She's 7 years old. She lives at a boarding school in Boston." The words came out like extracted confession. "Her mother was a casual relationship years ago. When she got pregnant, I offered financial support. I've paid for everything, private school, tutors, vacations, but I never visited her," Meredith completed, stunned. "No," he admitted, shame evident in every line of his face. "Because I'm a coward. Because I saw what happened to my own father when the world disappointed him, and I was terrified of becoming that, terrified of loving someone and failing her. So I convinced myself it was better to provide financially and stay emotionally distant, that it was more honest. Men who fear failing often create the very failures they try to avoid, because absence is the greatest failure of all." Meredith sat slowly in the chair across from him, processing this revelation that reconfigured everything she thought she knew about her husband. And her mother. "She lives in Boston, remarried. Her husband loves Eloise like his own. I'm the absent provider who appears in bank statements." His voice broke slightly. "And now the school is asking if I want to attend her piano recital, as if I were a normal father, as if I had any right." Meredith could have reacted with anger. She could have felt betrayed by the secret kept for so many months of marriage. But what she saw before her wasn't a calculating man hiding strategic information. It was a man destroyed by his own decisions, trapped in a snare of his own making. "Then go," she said simply. "What?" "Go to the recital. Meet her. Be the father you're afraid to be." "I can't," he protested. "It's been years. She doesn't know me. She probably hates me." "Or she probably longs to know you," Meredith countered. "Children are more generous than adults. They give second chances to those adults would have already discarded. But you have to try, Grayson, because what you're doing now," she gestured vaguely at his perfectly ordered life, "isn't protecting her. It's protecting yourself." The words were harsh, but true. He knew it. "Would you come with me?" he asked after a long silence. "I have no right to ask this, but I don't think I can do it alone." It was a defining moment for Meredith. She could have refused, established boundaries, kept distance from this complication she hadn't chosen. But she looked into the grey eyes of the man she'd slowly begun to love and saw what he was really asking. "Will you stand by me when I'm weak?" Will you help me be better than I think I can be? Yes, she responded. I'll go with you. The flight to Boston took an hour from New York. Meredith watched Grayson as the city approached through the window, the Charles River winding through historic neighborhoods. He stared without really seeing, his hands clenched on his knees with visible tension. Tell me about her, Meredith asked softly. About Eloise. I don't know her, he admitted. I know what the school reports say. She's brilliant at mathematics, plays piano, prefers reading to sports. But those are data points, that's not her. And her mother. Lauren is a good woman, he said thoughtfully. She deserved better than me. When I told her I wasn't ready to be a father, that I could offer money but not presents, she accepted with a grace I didn't deserve. She never pressured me, never spoke badly of me to Eloise. She just moved on. Did you love her? Meredith asked, surprising herself with the question but needing to know. No, he responded honestly. It was physical connection, not emotional. When she got pregnant, we both knew we had no romantic future, but that doesn't excuse my cowardice. Boston received them with the crisp autumn air characteristic of New England. The city spread elegantly along the harbor, its historic buildings mixing with modern architecture. Boston Academy was an imposing Gothic revival structure in Back Bay with views of the public garden. In the lobby, decorated with student artwork and athletic trophies, they waited nervously. Grayson had arranged to meet Lauren before the recital. They needed to coordinate how to introduce him to Eloise without traumatizing the girl. Lauren appeared 20 minutes later. She was petite, with chestnut hair pulled into a practical ponytail, dressed in casual elegance. Her eyes were kind, but also evaluating. Grayson, she greeted him with formal courtesy. And you must be Meredith. I've read about your restoration work. Impressive. Meredith appreciated that Lauren had researched, that she didn't see her simply as Grayson's appendage. Thank you for allowing this, Grayson said, clearly uncomfortable. It's not solely my decision, Lauren responded. Eloise deserves to know you. I've been honest with her about the situation. She knows you have difficulties with emotional connection, but she's curious. She wants to understand where she comes from. What did you tell her exactly? He asked. The age-appropriate truth. Lauren sat on a lobby bench, inviting them to do the same. That her biological father loves her in his way, but is afraid to get close because of experiences from his own childhood. That he provides for her because he cares, even if he shows that care from a distance. There are truths that hurt but heal, and there are lies that comfort but sicken. Good parents choose truth, however painful. You're more generous than I deserve, Grayson said. I don't do it for you, Lauren clarified firmly. I do it for my daughter. She deserves complexity, not simplifications. She deserves to know that people are complicated, that love comes in imperfect forms. Meredith watched the exchange, fascinated. Lauren wasn't being hostile, but she wasn't making things easy either. She was being fiercely protective of Eloise, which was exactly right. Can I see her? Grayson asked. Before the recital. Lauren nodded and led them down hallways with polished wood floors to a practice room. Through the round window, they saw a small girl sitting at a grand piano, her posture perfect, fingers moving over the keys with surprising grace. Eloise had Lauren's chestnut hair but Grayson's grey eyes. She was slender, almost fragile in appearance, with an intense concentration as she played a piece by Debussy. She's beautiful, Meredith whispered. She's everything I don't deserve, Grayson responded, his voice broken. When Eloise finished the piece, Lauren knocked softly on the door. The girl looked up, saw her mother, and then her eyes settled on Grayson. For an eternal moment, they simply looked at each other. Eloise, sweetheart, Lauren said gently, this is your father. He finally came to meet you. The girl climbed down from the piano bench with the careful deliberation of someone who's learned that composure is valued. She stood before Grayson, studying him with those grey eyes so identical to his it was unsettling. You have my eyes? She finally said. Yes, Grayson responded, kneeling to be at her height. I do, and you have. The best of both worlds, I think. Why didn't you come before? She asked directly. 7-year-olds have brutal honesty. Grayson could have lied, softened, evaded. But Meredith could see in his face that he was finally choosing vulnerability over control. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid I wouldn't be a good father, afraid I'd disappoint you. So I thought it was safer to keep you at a distance, where I couldn't hurt you. But now I understand that absence hurts too, and I'm very sorry, Eloise. Sorry for all the missed birthdays, the recitals where I wasn't there, the times you needed a father and only found a check." Tears ran freely down his face. Meredith had never seen him cry. She wasn't sure he'd ever allowed himself to cry. Eloise watched him for a long time, processing with the seriousness of children who've had to grow up too fast. Then, with simple decision, she hugged him. "It's okay to be scared," she said against his shoulder. "My mom says brave people are those who are afraid but still do the right thing, so thank you for being brave now." And in that moment, something in Grayson broke and healed simultaneously. He held his daughter as if she were the most precious treasure in the world, crying years of accumulated regret and fear. Meredith, standing in the doorway with Lauren, also cried, not from sadness but from relief, because this brutal honesty, this raw vulnerability, was exactly what Grayson needed to become the man she knew he could be. The recital that night was beautiful. Eloise played with confidence that defied her age, and when she finished her piece, she instantly sought Grayson in the audience. He stood applauding, tears still shining in his eyes, and she smiled with a pure happiness that illuminated the entire room. Afterward, the four of them had dinner at a New England seafood restaurant overlooking the harbor. Eloise talked about her school, her friends, her obsession with astronomy. Grayson listened as if every word were poetry, absorbing lost years in a single night. "Can I see you again?" he finally asked. "Not just once, regularly, if you want." "I'd like that," Eloise responded simply. "And I'd also like to get to know Meredith more. Mom says you're an architect. I want to design eco-friendly buildings someday." Meredith laughed, delighted. "Then we definitely have a lot to talk about." When they said goodbye at the airport, Eloise hugged both of them. "Thank you for coming," she whispered to Grayson. "I thought you'd never want to meet me." "I thought so too," he admitted, "but I was wrong about many things." On the flight back, Grayson took Meredith's hand and simply held it as New York approached. They didn't talk much, but it wasn't necessary. Sometimes shared silence communicates more than 1,000 words. The following 3 months brought profound changes. Grayson began traveling to Boston every 2 weeks to see Eloise. Sometimes Meredith accompanied him. Other times he went alone, slowly building a father-daughter relationship that should have existed from the beginning. The girl began spending holidays with them in New York, filling the penthouse with childish laughter that transformed cold spaces into warm home. But with progress also came pressure. Grayson's family, specifically Victoria, intensified their demands. Now that he demonstrated capacity for emotional connection with his daughter, they argued it was time to produce a legitimate heir to the business empire. The conversation exploded during a family dinner at Victoria's estate in the Hamptons. The matriarch had invited not only Grayson and Meredith, but also key business partners, important investors, and of course, Colette. Meredith immediately understood it was a carefully orchestrated trap. Colette arrived dazzling in a designer dress that probably cost more than a car. Her blonde hair impeccable, smile perfectly calculated, she moved through the room with the confidence of someone who knows her place in that world and has never questioned it. "Meredith, how?" "Lovely to see you," she said, air kissing near her cheeks. "I heard you're doing little restoration projects. How sweet that Grayson keeps you busy." The most effective poison is administered with smiles and polite words, because the victim can't defend herself without seeming paranoid or irrational. "They're not little projects," Grayson intervened firmly. "Meredith is leading our most important heritage restoration projects. Her work on the Savannah Mansion was featured in Architectural Digest last month. The satisfaction of seeing Colette blink in surprise was sweet, but brief. Victoria called everyone to the table, and the real show began. During the first courses, conversation flowed normally. Business, New York politics, social gossip. But with dessert came the masterstroke. "Grayson, darling," Victoria said with poisonous sweetness, "now that you've proven capable of fatherhood with Eloise, when can we expect news of a legitimate heir? The business needs continuity. Investors want to ensure there's a succession plan." The silence at the table was absolute. All eyes converged on Meredith, evaluating her, judging her, waiting. "Mother," Grayson said, dangerously calm, "that's a private matter between my wife and me." "Nonsense," Victoria dismissed. "When you marry with business responsibility of this caliber, nothing is private. The family has a right to reasonable expectations." "It's been 2 years, Grayson. 2 years, how much longer must we wait?" Meredith felt nauseous, not from pressure to have children, she'd eventually want that, but from being reduced again to biological function, to useful womb for producing corporate heirs. "Perhaps," Colette intervened with false concern, "there are difficulties. These things happen. No one would blame Meredith if she couldn't conceive. There are modern options, surrogacy, for example." It was too much. Meredith felt tears of humiliation burning her eyes, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Excuse me," she said with controlled voice, standing. "I need fresh air." She left for the garden without waiting for response. The Hamptons' night was warm, stars barely visible over light pollution. Meredith walked to an ornamental fountain, breathing deeply, trying to control the fury and pain that threatened to suffocate her. Grayson found her 5 minutes later. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I shouldn't have brought you here. I knew my mother would plan something." "Why?" she exploded. "Why does it matter so much to them? Why can't they just leave us alone?" "Because control is everything to my family," he responded bitterly. "Controlling money, controlling image, controlling the future. And children are control currency. They always have been. I won't bring a child into this world just to satisfy corporate expectations," Meredith said firmly. "If we ever have children, it will be because we want them, because we're ready, because it will be an expression of genuine love, not because your mother demands it." "I know," he assured, taking her hands. "And I completely agree. My mother can wait until the end of time if necessary. But that won't stop the pressure," she observed. "It won't stop the insinuations, the comments, the comparisons with women like Colette, who apparently would be more compliant." Grayson turned her to look at him directly. "Listen to me carefully, Meredith. I don't want Colette. I don't want anyone from that superficial world where people are interchangeable assets. I want you. Your intelligence, your integrity, your way of challenging me to be better. If that means fighting with my family for the rest of my life, so be it." It was the closest declaration to "I love you" he'd verbalized. And though he didn't use those specific words, Meredith heard them clearly in everything else he said. "Then let's fight together," she responded. "But I need to know we're truly together. That this isn't still a convenient contract you're maintaining through inertia." "Convenient contract?" he repeated incredulously. "Meredith, I don't know how to prove what I feel to you. I wasn't educated to express these things. But when you're not here, the penthouse feels empty. When we work together, every project is better because you bring perspective I'd never have. When I see Eloise interact with you, I see the kind of family I never thought I could have. I don't know if that's love by technical definition, but I know I don't want to live without you." It was enough. For now, it was enough. Meredith kissed him, pouring into that kiss everything she also didn't know how to express with words. When they separated, both were breathing irregularly. "We should go back," he said. "I have something to say to my family." They returned together to the dining room where dinner continued in uncomfortable murmurs. Grayson didn't sit. He simply stood beside Meredith and spoke with authority that permitted no interruptions. "Mother, family, friends, I want to make something absolutely clear. My marriage to Meredith is not subject to external approval. What we decide about our future, including if and when we have children, is exclusively ours. If that's unacceptable to anyone at this table, I'm genuinely sorry. But I won't sacrifice my marriage to please corporate or social expectations. Meredith is my priority. Period." Victoria went pale with fury, but before she could respond, something unexpected happened. Sterling, who rarely spoke at family gatherings since the crisis that had broken him years ago, stood up. "Well said, son," he said quietly. "I wish I'd had your courage when I was your age. I wish I'd put your mother before the empire. Maybe then," he looked meaningfully at Victoria, "our family would be less financially successful but more emotionally happy." It was the first time Sterling had publicly challenged his wife in decades. The shock on Victoria's face would have been comical if it weren't so sad. Grayson and Meredith left shortly after, leaving the family to process the cracks finally appearing in the perfect facade. In the car back, Grayson drove with one hand, holding Meredith's with the other. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For choosing me. For defending what's ours, for finally setting boundaries." "I should have done it long ago," he admitted, "but I was afraid of completely breaking with my family, of being alone. But then I realized I'm never alone. I have you." It was another step in their mutual transformation, but the journey was far from over. The envelope arrived on an ordinary March morning, when New York was waking with that sun promising early spring. Meredith was on the terrace, supervising the installation of new magnolias brought directly from South Carolina, when her father called. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice trembling with contained emotion, "I have news." Meredith felt a strange premonition. Her father rarely called without reason, especially after the shame of the arranged marriage. "What happened, Dad?" "I sold the plantation land," he announced, "all of it, to a development consortium that wants to create a heritage tourism site. They paid more than I expected. I can return the money to Grayson, all of it. You can be free, my girl." The words hit like an unexpected wave. Free. After 2.5 years of marriage that began as a transaction, she could finally be free, if she wanted. "Dad, I know the marriage wasn't your choice," her father continued, tears audible in his voice. "I know I sold you like chattel to save my pride, and I've lived with that shame every day since. But now I can make it right. You can ask for divorce. You can come back to Charleston. You can have the life you deserved from the beginning." Meredith hung up in shock. She sat on the iron bench, surrounded by the southern flowers Grayson had planted for her 2 years ago, processing what this meant. Freedom. Real choice. The opportunity to decide her life without financial pressures, without contractual obligations, without anything except her own desire. And what did she desire? The answer terrified her because it was clear. She wanted to stay. She wanted Grayson. She wanted the imperfect but authentic life they'd built together. She wanted more mornings sharing coffee on the terrace, more trips to Boston to see Eloise, more architectural projects where their minds complemented perfectly. But would he want her without the obligation of the contract? If she was truly free to leave, would he actively choose her to stay? Sometimes, getting what we've always wanted forces us to confront what we really need, and the two things don't always coincide. That night, during dinner, Meredith watched Grayson in silence. He talked about a complicated negotiation in Chicago, gesturing with his fork, completely oblivious to the storm in her mind. He looked relaxed in ways he wasn't when they'd met. The lines of perpetual tension on his forehead had softened. He smiled more. He was generally more human. Would part of that transformation disappear if she left? She waited until they finished dinner, until they were in the living room overlooking Manhattan's lights, twinkling like a terrestrial constellation. "My father called today," she finally said. "How is he?" Grayson asked distractedly, checking something on his phone. "Good. He sold the plantation land. For a good price. That's good for him. Good enough price to return all the money you paid for our marriage." Now she had his complete attention. Grayson put down his phone, slowly turning to face her. "What are you saying?" "That there's no more debt," she explained, keeping her voice steady though her heart beat violently. "The financial contract that motivated this marriage no longer exists, which means I'm free. Free to stay, free to go. For the first time, the choice is completely mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Grayson looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Shock, fear, something deeper she didn't know how to name. "And what do you want?" he finally asked, his voice hoarse. "Do you want freedom?" I don't know, Meredith admitted honestly. Part of me wants to go back to Charleston, start over, have the life I should have had at 20 before everything got complicated. But another part has gotten used to this, to us. And I don't know if staying because I've gotten used to it is reason enough. Used to, Grayson repeated, something dark crossing his face. Is that what we are to you? Comfortable habit? I don't know, she repeated, frustrated. What are we? Grayson, really, what are we? We started as a business transaction. We evolved into something, but we've never defined it. You've never said what you really feel. So how can I know if staying is because I love you or because I'm afraid to start over? Do you love me? He asked, and there was absolute vulnerability in those 3 words. Meredith took a deep breath. I think so. I think I fell in love with you somewhere between the poetry books and the magnolias, between Boston and defending our marriage before your family. But love isn't enough if it's not mutual, and I can't stay in a marriage where I'm the only one who loves. Grayson stood up, walked to the window, turned his back to her. His shoulders were tense, hands clenched in fists at his sides. I don't know how to love, he finally said, his voice barely audible. I wasn't taught. My family taught me control, strategy, how to build empires, but not how to build connections. When I tried with Eloise, I failed miserably for 7 years, and with you. He turned to face her, and Meredith saw tears in his grey eyes. With you, I have constant terror that you'll realize how broken I am, that you deserve better, someone who knows how to express feelings with romantic words, someone who doesn't need years to learn something most learn in adolescence. So yes, maybe you should take your freedom. Maybe you should find someone who can love you the way you deserve. Those who believe they have nothing to offer are often offering exactly what others need. Brutal honesty wrapped in imperfect vulnerability. Meredith approached, took his face in her hands. Idiot, she said softly. Don't you understand? I don't want someone who knows all the right words. I want someone who plants magnolias because I mentioned missing home. I want someone who read my entire thesis just to understand me better. I want someone who finally had the courage to face his daughter after years of cowardice. I want you, Grayson, with all your inability to express feelings, with all your terror of emotional connection, with all your inherited imperfections. But I need to know that if I stay, it's because you choose me, not because the contract is still in effect in your mind. Then stay, he begged, taking her hands. Please stay, not because there's a contract, not because it's convenient, not because you've gotten used to it. Stay because when you came into my empty life and filled it with meaning, because you taught me to feel again, because every day with you is better than the one before, because when I imagine the future, I no longer see just business success. I see breakfasts on the terrace, trips to Boston with Eloise, growing old together in this penthouse you transformed from mausoleum to home. I don't know if that's love by technical definition, but it's the closest to love I've ever felt. It was the most honest confession he'd ever given her, not wrapped in poetry, not perfectly articulated, but real and true and enough. Then I need to hear you say it, Meredith asked. I need to hear the words, Grayson, even if they cost you, even if they terrify you. I need to hear them. He took a deep breath, as if about to dive into unknown water. I love you, he said, his voice trembling. I love you, Meredith, and I'm terrified of losing you. And finally, after 2.5 years of arranged marriage that slowly became something real, Meredith heard the words she needed, not because the words were magic, but because they represented his willingness to be vulnerable, to admit need, to risk rejection for the possibility of connection. I love you too, she responded, and I'm not going anywhere. The kiss they shared was different from all the others. It wasn't just physical passion nor emotional relief. It was promise. It was choice. It was the beginning of something new, built on the foundation of something old. When they separated, Grayson held her against his chest. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For choosing me when you finally had the freedom not to. For loving me despite how hard I've made it. For believing in the man I can be even when I don't. Always, she promised, always. The 4 months that followed marked a complete transformation in their marriage. They no longer navigated the ambiguity of contract versus real connection. Now finally they were simply two people who had chosen each other with all the complexity, imperfection, and beauty that entailed. Grayson changed in subtle but significant ways. He began saying, "I love you" regularly, though each time seemed a conscious effort that would eventually become natural. He cancelled meetings to arrive home in time for dinner. He asked about her day with genuine interest, not as automatic courtesy, small gestures that meant everything. Meredith, for her part, dropped the last defenses she'd unconsciously maintained. She began expressing not just practical needs, but also emotional ones. She admitted when she felt insecure, when his family still hurt her, when she needed more than he naturally offered. And Grayson learned to listen. Not perfectly. Old habits died slowly but genuinely. Eloise visited more frequently, and the dynamic among the three became increasingly natural. The girl now called the penthouse Home 2 and had her own room decorated with posters of planets and constellations. Meredith helped with homework, attended piano recitals, offered female perspective that Lauren appreciated having as reinforcement. "You're good for him," Lauren told her during a visit to New York. "I've seen him change these past years. He's more complete, more human." "He changed me too," Meredith admitted. "He taught me that being strong doesn't mean never needing anyone. It means having the courage to be vulnerable with the right people." But not everything was linear progress. There were setbacks, of course. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with investors, where Grayson was attacked for decisions they'd made together about unprofitable restoration projects in historic southern neighborhoods, he reverted to old patterns. He shut down emotionally, responded in monosyllables, reverted to survival mode where control was everything. Meredith recognized the signs. Instead of retreating hurt, she confronted him directly. "Don't do this," she said. "Don't build walls again just because someone pressured you." "I'm not building walls," he defended, but his tone was distant. "Yes, you are, and I understand. It's a learned reflex. But you're not that person anymore, Grayson. You're not alone anymore, so talk to me. Tell me what really bothered you about that meeting." He looked at her for a long time, internal war visible in every line of his face. Then gradually the defenses fell. "They said I'm going soft," he admitted. "That since I got married, I've lost the shark instinct. That prioritizing heritage preservation over maximum profits is sentimentality that will destroy the business eventually." "And what do you think?" "I think," he said slowly, "maybe they were right about me getting softer, but I don't see it as weakness. Before only numbers on spreadsheets mattered. Now the people who live in those buildings matter. The communities that depend on those spaces, the history we preserve for future generations. If that's being soft, then I'm proud of it. True evolution isn't changing who we fundamentally are, but expanding our definition of what it means to be strong." Meredith smiled, relieved. "Then defend that. Don't go back to being the shark just because they pressure you. Be the man you discovered you can be." It was moments like these, where they navigated conflicts with honesty instead of evasion, that truly solidified their marriage. The most significant change came when Grayson proposed something completely unexpected. "I want us to visit your family in Charleston," he said during breakfast. "Properly. Not a quick visit, but several days. I want to meet your grandmother, see where you grew up, understand where your strength comes from." Meredith was stunned. Grayson rarely took vacations, and when he did, it was to strategic places, conferences, meetings, networking events. Charleston offered no business utility. It was purely personal. "Are you sure?" she asked. "My family isn't sophisticated like yours. The house is small, modest. My grandmother still cooks on a wood stove." "Good," he responded with that small smile she loved. "Then I'll finally learn authentic Southern cooking." 2 weeks later, they traveled to Charleston. The historic city clung to the peninsula, its cobblestone streets rising and falling between antebellum mansions with wide porches. It was May, and the surrounding low country exploded with azaleas and Spanish moss draped from live oaks. The family home was exactly as Meredith had described it, small white-painted wood, with a garden where magnolias bloomed and chickens pecked freely. Her grandmother, Josephine, was a diminutive woman of 80, with gnarled hands from working the land all her life, and dark eyes that still sparkled with sharp intelligence. "So you're the Yankee who bought my granddaughter," she said directly when Grayson introduced himself. He could have been offended. He could have denied, justified, explained the complications of the arrangement. But he was learning. "Yes, ma'am," he responded simply, "and I've spent every day since trying to deserve her." Josephine studied him for a long time, evaluating him with the wisdom of someone who'd seen entire generations born, grow, love, die. "Well," she finally said, "at least you're honest. Come on, let's eat." Honest men are always hungry. For 3 days, Grayson was absorbed into traditional Southern life. Josephine put him to work in the vegetable garden, teaching him to distinguish herbs, pick ripe tomatoes, shell peas. She dragged him to Sunday service at the historic church, ignored his protests of being agnostic. She made him taste shrimp and grits and she-crab soup that no Michelin-starred restaurant could replicate. And in the process, she told stories of the Civil War, of hardships survived with dignity, of men who left and never returned, of women who held entire families together on narrow shoulders. "Southern women are made of earth and fire," she told him, while stirring a pot of Brunswick stew on the wood stove. "Your wife comes from a long line of women who suffered but never broke. Remember that when you feel like you can't handle modern problems. Meredith can handle anything life throws at her." Grayson looked at Meredith, who was helping her mother hang laundry in the garden, laughing at something her cousin had said. The golden Carolina afternoon light enveloped her, and he saw not just the woman he loved, but the legacy of strength she came from. "I know," he said to Josephine. "I'm learning that every day." On the last night in Charleston, while they were alone on the porch overlooking the harbor, Meredith asked, "What do you think about all this?" "I think," Grayson responded, taking her hand, "that I finally understand who you really are. Not just the brilliant architect, not just the patient wife, but the girl from the Carolina Lowcountry who carries centuries of resilience in her blood. And I feel lucky to be chosen by someone like that." "I'm the lucky one," she corrected, "because you chose me even when you finally didn't have to." They kissed as the sun set over Charleston, tinting everything with golden and crimson tones. And in that moment, surrounded by a harbor that had witnessed centuries of American history, they both knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly where they belonged. Together. 3 months after returning from Charleston, Meredith began feeling strange. Morning nausea she attributed to stomach flu, fatigue she assigned to demanding work schedules, heightened sensitivity to smells she thought was just momentary peculiarity. It was her gynecologist during a routine checkup who detected the truth. "Congratulations," the doctor said with a warm smile. "You're pregnant, approximately 8 weeks." Time stopped. Meredith looked at the ultrasound where a small, pulsing dot represented new life, and she felt a wave of emotions so complex she didn't know how to process them. Joy, terror, hope, anxiety. This had been hypothetical just months ago, pressure from Grayson's family, social expectation, something abstract in the future, but now it was real, tangible, a creature growing inside her that would change everything irrevocably. Driving home, Meredith processed how to tell Grayson. Should she do something special, romantic, or just say it directly? And how would he react? They'd spoken vaguely about children eventually, but never with concrete plans. She decided on direct honesty. It was what worked best between them. That night, during dinner, she left the envelope with medical results on the table next to Grayson's plate. "What's this?" he asked, confused. "Open it." He read the results, his expression transforming from confusion to shock, to something Meredith couldn't completely identify. "You're pregnant," he said, as if needing to hear the words aloud to believe them. "Yes." "How do you feel about it?" It was a considerate question, not assuming her emotion, but genuinely asking. "Scared," she admitted honestly. "But also happy, I think. It's hard to distinguish what I feel when everything is so intense." "Scared of what specifically?" he asked, moving closer to take her hand. Everything, she confessed. If I'll be a good mother, if your family's pressure will ruin this, if it will change our dynamic too much, if you'll lose me to my old self again, he completed softly. If I'll become distant, controlling, too focused on doing things correctly according to external standards. She nodded, tears running down her cheeks. Grayson knelt before her, took her face in his hands. Listen to me carefully. This baby isn't a family obligation. It's not a corporate tool. It's not fulfillment of social expectations. It's an expression of what we are together. And I promise, his voice broke slightly, I promise to be the father for this child that I couldn't be initially for Eloise. I promise to learn as I go, fail with grace, prioritize family over business. I promise we'll raise this child with love, not pressure. Do you believe me? Yes, she whispered. I believe you. And you? He asked gently. Are you happy? Underneath the fear, do you really want this? Meredith considered the question honestly. Then, slowly, a smile crossed her face. Yes, I want this. I want to have your child. I want to create a family we choose, not that was imposed on us. I want to give Eloise a sibling. I want to see what kind of parents we can be together. Sometimes the best gifts come wrapped in fear, because anything truly valuable deserves the vulnerability of terror. That night they talked for hours, about potential names, about how to adapt the penthouse for a baby, about how to involve Eloise in the process. Grayson admitted his own fears, replicating his parents' mistakes, failing this child as he'd initially failed Eloise, losing control over family dynamics. But he also expressed hope that this time, with Meredith by his side, he could do things right from the beginning. Hope that their child would grow without the pressures that had formed him, free to be whoever they wanted without family mandates weighing. They decided to wait 3 months before announcing publicly, past the risky first trimester before sharing with families and friends. But they told Eloise immediately during her next visit. The girl reacted with an adorable mixture of maturity and childish enthusiasm. I'm going to be a big sister? She asked, grey eyes shining. Yes, Meredith confirmed. What do you think about that? Eloise considered seriously. I think I'll be a good big sister. I can teach about constellations, and how to play piano, and how to deal with complicated adults. She looked meaningfully at Grayson, because Dad can be very complicated sometimes. They all laughed, and the tension Meredith didn't even know she was holding released. This was going to be okay. They would be an imperfect family, certainly, with inevitable challenges and misunderstandings. But they would be a chosen family, built on a foundation of genuine love instead of obligation. When they finally announced to Grayson's family 3 months later, the reaction was predictably mixed. Victoria expressed satisfaction that barely hid relief. Finally, the heir she'd demanded. Business partners congratulated with enthusiasm about dynastic continuity. Colette disappeared completely from their lives, apparently accepting final defeat. But Sterling, Grayson's father, pulled him aside after the announcement. Be different from me, he said simply. Be the present father I couldn't be. This is your second chance to get it right. Don't waste it. Grayson hugged his father, both with tears in their eyes, healing decades of distance in that simple moment. Meredith's pregnancy progressed without major complications, though not without challenges. Persistent nausea during the first trimester forced her to work from home frequently. The second trimester brought renewed energy, but also growing physical discomfort. The third trimester was a marathon of final preparations, increased anxiety, and moments of profound vulnerability. Grayson transformed during those 9 months in ways no business contract could have achieved. He learned to massage swollen feet, prepare strange midnight cravings, read parenting books with the seriousness he once reserved for financial reports. But more significantly, he learned to simply be present. When Meredith cried from hormonal changes or irrational fears, he didn't try to fix or rationalize. He simply held her. When she needed space, he gave it without offense. When she needed closeness, he dropped everything to be by her side. You're doing this right, she told him one night, lying in bed with her prominent belly between them. Being a partner, being a future father, everything. It doesn't always feel that way, he admitted. Sometimes I still want to control everything, solve problems that have no solutions, plan every contingency. But I'm learning that some aspects of life require surrendering to the process. Trusting. Trusting what? Us. That together we can handle whatever comes. It was exactly what she needed to hear. Eloise visited increasingly frequently as the due date approached. She helped decorate the baby's room. They decided to wait to know the sex, wanting the surprise. The girl chose children's books in bookstores, practiced lullabies, discussed potential names with adult seriousness. If it's a girl, she suggested during a visit, you should name her Luna, because the moon is beautiful and mysterious like Mom Meredith. And if it's a boy, Grayson asked. Then Orion, because he's a warrior who's also vulnerable like you, Dad. The wisdom of the 8-year-old left both adults speechless. Labor began 2 weeks before the estimated date, at 3 in the morning. Meredith woke with regular contractions that gradually intensified. Grayson, who had meticulously prepared, hospital bag ready, route to the hospital memorized, medical contacts on speed dial, surprisingly panicked. Is this it? Is it happening? Should we go now? Are you okay? Do you need anything? Grayson, Meredith said with surprising calm for someone in labor, I need you to breathe. We still have time. But arriving at the hospital, her own calm began to fracture. Labor was intensely painful, more than she'd expected. Hours stretched endlessly. Medication helped, but didn't completely eliminate the pain. And in the most difficult moments, when contractions were so intense she couldn't speak, Grayson was there. He held her, breathed with her, murmured words of encouragement. Never failed, never stepped away, never let her feel alone for even a second. You can do this, he said repeatedly. You're the strongest woman I know. You come from a line of women who survived wars. This is nothing for you. And somehow, those simple words gave her strength when she thought she had none left. After 18 hours of labor, they finally heard the piercing cry of new life. A girl, small, perfect, with dark hair and, when she briefly opened her eyes, the unmistakable grey of her father. It's her, Meredith whispered, exhausted but radiant as the nurse placed the baby on her chest. It's our Luna. Grayson cried openly without shame, without trying to control emotion. He leaned down to kiss Meredith's forehead, then gently touched their daughter's tiny cheek. Hello, little one, he murmured. I'm your dad, and I promise to love you every day of your life. I promise to be present, not absent. I promise you'll always know you're chosen, loved, valued for who you are, not for who others expect you to be. It was an oath made not just to his daughter, but to himself. A commitment to break family cycles, create new legacy. The best gifts we give our children aren't material possessions, but broken patterns, honest truths, and unconditional love wrapped in constant presence. When Eloise met her sister hours later, her reaction was pure magic. She sat carefully in the chair next to the hospital bed, holding Luna with the reverence of someone who understands fragility. Hi, Luna, she whispered. I'm your big sister Eloise. I'm going to teach you so many things about stars and music and how to be brave when you're scared. And I'll always protect you. Always. Meredith and Grayson exchanged a moist look. This imperfect, patched-together family created against all odds was exactly what they both needed. The Tribeca penthouse vibrated with sounds that 3 years ago would have been unimaginable. Children's laughter, small footsteps running through marble hallways, off-key songs sung at full volume. Luna, now 3 years old, chased her sister Eloise through the terrace while she tried to teach her constellation names using a 3-dimensional model. Meredith watched from the couch, one hand resting on her belly that barely began showing signs of a second pregnancy. This time, a boy. This time, planned and desired from the moment of conception. Grayson came out with 2 cups of coffee, handing her one as he sat beside her. What are you thinking about? He asked. How much everything has changed, she responded honestly. 4 years ago, I was trembling in a bridal suite, terrified of the man I'd married. And now, he encouraged with a soft smile, Now I can't imagine life without you. Without this beautiful, chaotic family we built together." He took her hand, kissed her knuckles. "Me neither. I used to think control was strength, that vulnerability was weakness, that love was a dangerous luxury only fools allowed themselves. But you taught me I was completely wrong." "And what is love, then?" Meredith asked, "according to your new philosophy?" "Love is," he paused, carefully considering, "choosing someone every day, even when it's hard. It's being seen completely, flaws included, and being accepted anyway. It's allowing someone to change your life, trusting the changes will be for the better. It's planting magnolias because your wife misses home, even when you don't know how to express what you feel. It's having the courage to be an imperfect father instead of an absent provider. It's building family not through obligation, but through active choice." Meredith smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "That's a beautiful definition." "I learned from the best," he responded. Eloise ran over to them, Luna clinging to her hand. "Dad, Mum, Luna says she wants to go to Charleston to visit Great-Grandma Josephine. Can we go this weekend?" "Why not?" Grayson said. "It's been a while since we had Grandma's she-crab soup." "And we can see the stars from the Battery," Eloise added excitedly. "They're better there than in New York." As the girls ran back to play, Grayson turned to Meredith. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For that first night when you were terrified and vulnerable you didn't run. For giving me time to learn how to love. For believing I could change when I didn't believe it myself. For building this with me." He gestured broadly at the family, terrace, life they'd created. "For being my home." "You're my home too," Meredith responded. "Regardless of where we are physically. Home isn't a place. It's the person you choose to walk through life with." They kissed softly as the New York sun descended over the city that had seen them transform from contractual strangers to genuine couple, from arranged marriage to chosen love. The best love stories aren't those that begin perfectly, but those that transform imperfections into strengths, obligations into choices, and strangers into family. That night, after putting the girls to bed, Meredith and Grayson sat on the terrace overlooking illuminated Manhattan. He had finally learned to disconnect from work, prioritize these moments of shared quietude. "You know what your grandmother told me last time we visited Charleston?" Grayson asked. "What?" "She said, you finally stopped pretending to be cold stone and accepted you're a warm human. Well done, Yankee." Meredith laughed. "That sounds exactly like her." "She was right," he admitted. "I spent 35 years building walls, convincing myself it was safer. But walls don't just keep pain out, they also keep love out, and life without love isn't life at all. It's just existence." "Then what is this?" Meredith asked, though she knew the answer. "This," he responded, wrapping her in his arms, "is finally being alive." They remained like that as stars emerged over New York, two people who had begun as a transaction and ended as choice, as family, as love, in its truest and most complicated and beautiful form. Years later, when Luna asked how her parents fell in love, Meredith would tell her the truth. Not a romanticized version of love at first sight, but the honest story of an arranged marriage that slowly, painfully, beautifully transformed into something real. She'd say that true love rarely begins with fireworks. It often begins with a silk shawl, with magnolias planted on a foreign terrace, with the choice to stay even when freedom is finally offered. And she'd say that the best love stories are those where both people choose to grow, change, be vulnerable with someone who sees them completely. Because in the end, love isn't finding the perfect person. It's choosing someone's imperfection and deciding it's worth every challenge, every difficult conversation, every moment of doubt. Love is the silk shawl offered to a trembling woman, its fatherhood reclaimed after years of absence, its magnolias on a Manhattan terrace, its coffee shared on the terrace every morning. It's being present when it would be easier to be absent. It's saying, "I love you," even when the words don't come naturally. It's choosing every day to build something beautiful from an imperfect foundation. And as Meredith and Grayson watched stars over New York that night, they both knew with absolute certainty they had built exactly that. Imperfect, chosen, real, lasting love. The kind of love that transcends contracts and obligations. The kind of love that had finally made them free.